November is World Prematurity Month. March of Dimes is an organization that is devoted to optimizing the health of premature babies and supporting their families before, during, and after birth.
March of Dimes started years ago when Roosevelt was president, and it was actually dimes that were collected to help fund polio research. Well, polio's pretty much been taken care of, so now the focus is on preventing prematurity and kind of helping parents through their journey. The incidence of prematurity and babies who need special care in NICUs is pretty high in the United States as compared with other developed nations. So it's something that we're really focusing on, and March of Dimes has been great because they provide funding for some studies that have really impacted our care, that have really improved things for our babies. Another change that I've seen over the years is how early babies can survive. It used to be years ago, probably in the 70s and 80s, maybe a baby that was 28 weeks was kind of on the edge of what we would call viability or survival. And now we have babies that are 23 and 24 weeks that can survive. So it's pretty phenomenal.
March of Dimes has helped families across America, including a staff member here at Seaman High School.
So I found out that I was pregnant on December 2nd, 2016. This pregnancy was a bit of a surprise as we had had 3 miscarriages prior to that. So we have Charlotte, who's 5. When Charlotte was about 2, we decided that we wanted to have another baby, and realized that we were going to have infertility problems, and then had 3 miscarriages after that. So this baby was kind of a surprise because we just kind of decided we were okay with being a family of 3. That first 13 weeks, which is the first trimester, we really weren't very hopeful. We thought, you know, the other 3 ended in a miscarriage. That was probably going to happen with this one. And it didn't. And so everything was great. I was able to tell my students, and that was really exciting. At the 20-week ultrasound, which is where you find out the gender, they saw that the baby, first of all, that it was a boy, and that he was just measuring small. They weren't super concerned at that point. They said, you know, some babies are just small. And so then we started meeting with specialists. So then we got referred to, they're called perinatologists, the perinatologist at Children's Mercy in Kansas City. And we had a few appointments there where they just did a ton of sonograms, trying to figure out what was wrong. And they figured out that the baby had a clubbed left foot. His right eye was maybe smaller. His middle finger on his right hand was bent. He still had a finger, but we called it his I love you hand. And those were really the main things that they were finding. But when I was pregnant with him, with every doctor that we came across, I always asked, I always said, you know, we haven't talked about names. We haven't talked about, you know, we haven't decorated the nursery. Are we okay to do that? Am I going to bring this baby home? And every single doctor said yes, of course. Everything that is wrong is fixable. Crosby Michael Schrader was born at 6 o'clock on Thursday, July 7th, via C-section. And when he came out, he was 2 pounds, 12 ounces. And so he was technically a preemie because he was born at 35 weeks, 5 days. So they came out and they had to intubate him right away. So they he kind of cried, but he wasn't breathing super well on his own. And so it was very common that they were just going to intubate him to help him breathe and go ahead and put the feeding tube in. And so he went straight over to Children's Mercy, to the NICU. And I stayed at Truman, which was the other hospital, to recover because I had just had a C-section. On Friday, he had an MRI. And just like adults, for babies, you have to hold super still in an MRI. So they had to give him a little medicine to make him hold still. And so they called up to my husband, to Clayton, and said, you know, he's not cooperating, like he never was. He was always ornery. And they said, we're going to need to get him a little bit of medicine to calm him down. So they did that. Well, they called back like 30 minutes later, gave him more medicine because he still would not lay still. And that really, I think, should have been the sign that something wasn't right with the results of the MRI. Because we got the results of the MRI the Saturday morning after he was born on Thursday. The results came back, and it was discovered that he was missing major parts of his brain. And so we, from those findings, we were told that, he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, he couldn't taste, he couldn't smell, he couldn't swallow, he couldn't eat, he couldn't suck, he couldn't sit up, he couldn't, any of these things that babies and kids do. He just was never going to do them. So that was really hard. That was probably one of the worst days of my life. And Clayton and I were then kind of guided to a room where we just sat there and cried, and we just started to pray for what the answer was. And inevitably it was decided that he wasn't going to survive. And so they took the tubes out and took the feeding tube out, and we started the hospice process. And so we had amazing doctors the entire time. They were such great people, and they really helped and supported us through that. And so we did a dedication for him on the next Wednesday, and then we pulled his tubes on Thursday and just started loving on him as much as we could. So they're in the hospital. And so we were there until Sunday. And then on Sunday, his heart was still beating. That was really the only part of his body that worked, was his heart. But anything else, couldn't hear, couldn't see, couldn't suck, couldn't swallow, he wasn't going to live. And eventually his heart would stop anyways, just because none of the other functions of his body were working. And so at that point on Monday morning, we went to a place called the Kansas City Hospice House. And the hospice process is really just comforting people through the dying process. And the dying process doesn't look a whole lot different if you're 99 or if you're 15 days old. And so the people there were amazing. In fact, I walked in and one of our doctors was the cousin of one of my former students, so I recognized the last name, so that was kind of cool. But we just hung out there, and we just spent the time with the three of us, with Clayton and I and Crosby, and we brought Charlotte up to the hospice house, and we really debated on whether to do that or not, but we did decide to. And she got to hold him and carry him around, and I've got videos of her singing to him and all that. And then that was on a Saturday, and then Sunday he passed away at about, it was sometime between 6:30 and 6:45. That's how peaceful it was. I was just holding him and rocking him, and I was actually journaling, and I hadn't really felt him move for a while, and so I grabbed the stethoscope and listened, and there was no heartbeat. So it was very peaceful, but also very sad, very, very sad. So that's Crosby's story. From Crosby, we learned a lot of lessons in loving deeply. We had to love each other really deeply through all of this. And a lot of people loved us really deeply through all of this. The doctors at Children's Mercy became part of our family. We stayed when Crosby was at the hospital and I got discharged. We stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, which is an amazing organization. And anytime you drive through McDonald's, you should always put money in the Ronald McDonald House, because we are a product of that. But a lesson in loving deeply. You really should love each other deeply. And people brought meals. People came to the memorial service. it was just really incredible. And then the other thing that we hung on to was we always said that Crosby was our greatest adventure. That was what his nursery was decorated in, was kind of an adventure camping theme. And it held true to the very end that he had quite the personality, all 2 pounds, 12 ounces of him. He had a full head of red curly hair. And when he was born, what I would like to do is he was small enough that I was able to just tuck him into my shirt. And I'd just rub his head with his soft hair on my lips. And he had a great personality. He loved us deeply, all 2 pounds of him.
After experiencing the loss of Crosby this summer, Mrs. Schrader was worried about returning to school.
I will say that I know that it was awkward for students to come back at the beginning of the year. And some of them knew and some of them didn't know. And that was really something that I had to wrestle with when I made the choice whether I was going to come back on time or not. And I got cards from kids like sympathy cards, and that meant a lot. I think that so many times kids don't think of their teachers as real people and have real feelings and hurt. And what happened this summer was really hurtful. And to know that your teenage students care about you and reach out to you and love you like that is really special. And it just affirmed that this is home to me and this is my family. And the staff here was just amazing, and they supported me on my worst days this year, and they've just helped me through the entire process. So,
if you're interested in supporting March of Dimes, there are different ways to get involved.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just talking about awareness of prematurity. A lot of people have no idea that NICUs even exist until they find themselves in a NICU. So I think just being understanding to folks that are going through that at the time. So just like moral support, financial support is really important. And every little bit counts. It all adds up, and it helps fund that research that is just so important.
Along with Mrs. Schrader and her family, March of Dimes financially helps millions of families across the nation. If you want to support March of Dimes, you can donate at donate.marchofdimes.org.